You might have noticed that Brandon and I were missing during the Switch 2 Direct hype, and it turns out there's a very good reason for that. Both Brandon and myself have been in New York playing the console all day. We have gone hands-on with the Switch 2 right after the Nintendo Direct aired, actually. So we weren't able to be there because we were there in person. We did what sensible people would do. When Nintendo extended us an invitation, we booked a plane ticket and flew across the country to spend the better part of a day playing Nintendo's new console. And I think we have a lot to say about it. And honestly, if you're coming here for a hot take, you're probably not going to find one. I think our impressions are mostly positive.
And yeah, and to be clear, this is coming from a completely hands-on impressions perspective. The guys back at the ranch have already been talking about all the finer details of price and stuff like that. But for us, it's all about the experience.
Yeah, we picked up the console. The first thing that we were able to do was actually hold the Switch 2 in our hands. There were several demo stations set up throughout the experience, which is, to my understanding, exactly the same one that the public is going to be able to experience, although we had a much longer session. But when you walk in, the very first thing are functional but inoperable Switch 2 consoles, if that makes sense. There's hardware in them. They're not dummy units. And we were able to take the Joy-Con off, snap them back on, kind of get a feel for how the console feels in the hand, and honestly stress test it a bit. One of the first things I did at Nintendo's own encouraging, I tried to rip a Joy-Con off. I tried, not with all my strength, but what I would call an unreasonable amount of force, and I couldn't budge it.
You also did the dangle test. You were hanging the Switch from your fingers by one of the Joy-Cons, and it was fine.
Yeah, there wasn't even a hint of separation. If you watched the Direct, you know that is because, and this actually surprised me, the SL and SR buttons are made of metal. They are the magnets that hold the entire thing together. So they put some chonky, substantial magnets into the Joy-Con. I truly wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, and the buttons themselves are also much wider than they were on Switch 1 Joy-Cons. Those were the M&Ms of buttons on Joy-Con 1 and really hard to press, but they're so much wider and there's more surface area, and pressing the buttons feels so much better.
Yeah, they clearly focused on comfort a bit more this time around with the Switch 2 Joy-Con, or the Joy-Con 2. Buttons have a bit more surface area, but they have the same really nice tactility to them that the Switch 1 buttons had. A short but satisfying click to each button. And I was really impressed with just how nice the finish of the overall console feels in the hand. It had almost a satin type finish that the Switch 1 doesn't have.
Yeah, it felt so much more premium than the original Switch 1 base model. And even more so than the Switch OLED, which is a pretty big leap over the original in terms of feel, especially on that new chassis on the tablet. But yeah, it's so comfortable in the hands. I mean, it'll be a long time before we get to actually, have long extended sessions with it in handheld mode. So it still remains to be seen if, we'll need accessories to play in handheld mode and make it comfortable. But first impressions, it does seem better.
Yeah, I was particularly impressed with the screen. Obviously, it's a much larger screen at 7.9 inches up from 6.2. But beyond that, it actually had a remarkable contrast ratio to it. Blacks looked very inky on this display, despite it being an LCD. It being a 1080p display means that it looked sharper than ever. Having variable refresh rate and 120 hertz on the portable display is also just
and HDR.
And HDR. Yeah, there's so much tech crammed into this thing that honestly, in an interesting way, it feels like Nintendo is kind of driving back towards wanting to be on the cutting edge of things. That the technology that they've put in here is enough to make it feel like it's not so tangibly far behind current gen offerings as to feel dated.
And we'll talk more about the game specifically in other videos, but I remember walking up to Mario Kart World, and we played it on TV first before playing it in handheld. And I remember walking up to the station and starting the game and being like, whoa, that's really sharp. That is not what I'd expect on Nintendo Switch 1. Seeing Mario Kart it was 1440p, right?
Yeah, Nintendo confirmed we were playing, the demo we played was 1440p.
It looked incredible.
Yeah, it's really hard to understate just how impressive Mario Kart World looks in motion when you're actually playing it too. Because it's one thing to watch it in a direct and to watch a trailer where you can pause and scrutinize and look at things very closely. It's quite another to be actively engaged in a race against people where you're focusing on the gameplay first and then the visuals second. I was just enthralled with how Mario Kart World performed and looked on the Switch 2, to say nothing of when we did get to play handheld mode.
And it's crazy too, because Mario Kart World it's 24 players, it's a big world, but it's still I don't recall experiencing a dropped frame.
Yeah, Mario Kart World performed flawlessly, which is what I was hoping to see from a console that is dropping in 2 months. This Mario Kart World is the launch game for the Switch 2, and so I was excited to see that it was polished to what I would call the Nintendo level of perfection, right? The same performance that we saw with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which of course is another completely rock solid game.
Yeah, and looking at a different game, Metroid Prime 4, which we got to play in 1080p 120 frames per second, just blew my mind. It looked fantastic playing at 120 FPS.
Yeah, Metroid Prime was not on my list of games that were going to be 120 FPS games. I said previously on the Week in Nintendo that I thought we were definitely going to have 1080p 120 FPS games, but Metroid Prime was so far down on the possibility list for me. I thought we would have seen, frankly, Mario Kart World well before we saw Metroid Prime 4, because that seems to be a title that is meant to push visuals fairly strongly. But I was super impressed to see what Retro's done there. Just the overall quality of the games that were on offer at the Switch 2 premiere event were impressive. I recaptured that sense of being unable to believe what I was seeing, even though I was in the room seeing and experiencing these things.
And, we got to play in a variety of different ways. We got to play some games in handheld. We got to play some games with the Switch Joy-Con grip, which I thought felt quite a bit more comfortable than the old one.
Yeah, the new Joy-Con grip, one thing you pointed out was that it actually has, I think Nintendo is calling them GL and GR buttons, these kind of paddle handle buttons, which is becoming more of a thing in the pro controller space. You see them on the DualSense Edge now. They're on the Switch 2 Pro controller as well, which is another interesting piece of hardware I really want to get to talk about. But overall, the Joy-Con grip is far more satisfying this time, and I just can't get enough of that magnetic snap. It feels more like we're getting closer to the console actually making that sound from the commercials.
It's crazy because when you bring the Joy-Con up close and it does, the magnetic pull kicks in, there's a lot of force. It's not a weak connection by any means.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people are going to have trouble believing until they actually get the opportunity to try one themselves. But I remember feeling a bit of, quite frankly, almost fear, like nervousness about when it was getting closer. I was like, oh, it's going to yank out of my hand and pull onto the console, like in the animations. And while it's obviously not quite that forceful, it pulls itself in very, very forcefully when you're holding it. It's impossible to connect that thing wrong.
It's snug in a way that the original Switch Joy-Cons aren't. Because
Yeah.
like when you're holding the Switch One, there's some give. Like when you're trying to twist it, and it doesn't feel good. There's a creakiness to it that makes it feel like it could break. I did not have that sensation with Switch 2.
Yeah, if anything, with the Joy-Con attached, Switch 2 feels like a Switch Lite. It feels like these controls are fully embedded.
Like one solid unit.
Exactly. Yeah, my Switch One, heck, every Switch One I've owned, there's always been that little bit of play in the Joy-Con connection where it can move up or down to a concerning degree, in my opinion. There's none of that here. There's no movement that is unintended with those Joy-Con, and when it's fully together, snapped into one unit, it looks like it was built that way.
Before we get a little further into the controls, I thought the kickstand was interesting. Like, it's so thin, and it looks so flimsy, like almost like the Switch 1 kickstand. But there's so much resistance in that kickstand that you can really dial in how much you want it to bend. That viewing angle, like if you set it where you want it, it's not moving. It's going to stay there.
I was very impressed by the kickstand, and I shared your concerns about it because I looked at it and I was like, that is a very skinny kickstand for a very chonky device. And I was deeply impressed by just how much I was able to, like you said, dial that in. One of the first things I did when I got to hold the Switch 2 was I pulled the kickstand out and I just put my palm on it and pushed it down, and it went all the way down, and then I slightly pulled it up, and it every point at which I didn't have to fine tune the placement of it at all, and it was on not like an ideal surface either. It was like a plastic light box with light shooting up out of it. Not something someone would want to rest a Switch on, generally speaking, and expect the kickstand to stay. But I was adjusting it by like just random amounts, trying to see if I could make it flop down, and it never did.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I thought it was funny when you were first getting your hands on the Switch 2 hardware, you couldn't find the SD card slot.
Yeah, the SD card slot is hidden right underneath the kickstand, which is where I expected it to be. But on the Switch 1 and the Switch OLED, and even the Switch Lite, it's in a much more obvious location. Like there's a deep groove in the back of it where, the SD card is a tiny speck against it comparatively. Whereas this one, that opening is just the size of an SD card, like just small enough to put a micro SD Express in there, which for those of you that don't know, micro SD Express is the same size as the Switch micro SD. It's just faster. So it's just a tiny little slot. And in the environment we were in, because the lighting was kind of poor, like
Yeah.
you'll see in our video footage that's on the screen right now probably that we were shooting against dimly lit conditions in most cases, so it was hard to see anything against the black body of the Switch when you had a light shining right in your face. But yeah, Brandon spotted it, and it was it's just right there. It feels like a very no nonsense design.
Mm-hmm.
You have the little pops of color that are playful on the Joy-Con rails, but outside of that, it's just a black handheld monster.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. I think the build quality on the system feels excellent so far. So that's of no concern. This isn't your play school console anymore. This feels like a proper, device.
Yeah, it feels like a grown-up version of the Switch. Like this is for people that have grown up with the console and now have disposable income. The Switch 2 feels extremely premium, and I would say that it feels much nicer than any other handheld, including PC handhelds that I've gotten my hands on. I would toss my Steam Deck out for this thing. I would obviously upgrade from the Switch one. It's the materials used here feel like they're of a whole other class than what was used for the Switch one. Obviously, it's still plastic, and I think the screen is also plastic. I couldn't really tell. And Nintendo didn't provide any details on if they were using glass this time around. But I will say it had a very pleasing look to it. Like, colors really pop on that screen.
Yeah, when you were playing Tears of the Kingdom in handheld mode, the just the Great Sky Islands, I remember feeling like, I don't know, there was something about the warm colors that didn't feel the same as what I experienced on my television, and in a good way. Like those deep warm colors, like I really got the feeling of that location because of that.
Yeah, and I imagine part of that is due to the fact that the built-in display supports HDR, as we mentioned before, and that's going to provide you with a depth of color that just frankly isn't there
Yeah.
in other instances. So I think that we're really in a scenario where it's just going to be this really cool time to be kind of a techie person, like if you're into gear, if you're into the specs and what's under the hood of these, there's a lot to really like here. I think that Nintendo has absolutely smashed it out of the park on the hardware front. One thing I did find strange is, of all the things, because we got to see, I'd say most things, they did not let us put our hands on a dock at any point.
No, I mean, I didn't even see a dock I didn't see a dock that wasn't behind glass.
Yeah, it was. I understand why Nintendo at an event like this would lock up the consoles, because this is, by the time you're listening to this or watching this, this will be open to the public. Same exact setup, just shorter time. They're not going to have these people in here for 10 hours. But it felt weird to me that we couldn't just pick one up. I mean, because they had at various points throughout the venue Switch 2s and docks and accessories, pro controllers under glass that we could look at, and we filmed plenty of, but we couldn't, just ask them to hey, could you lift that up, and we could just pick one up and look at it real quick. And maybe that's just something they didn't. I don't think there's anything nefarious there. I think they just didn't think anyone would want to.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see there being a lot of reason to play with the dock other than wanting to see that back shell coming off. And honestly, one of the things about the Switch 1 I kind of hate, that original Switch dock, that pull down tray that holds, that hides the cords and everything. I hated that thing. I hated it so much.
Yeah, I would say that I'm not a fan of even the OLED dock design.
Me neither. Yeah.
I don't think Nintendo ever got it quite refined enough. And it certainly accounts for maybe, only one type of setup, right? Like if your cables drift off to the right of your console, if they need to go left, you're in a different situation. So I'm curious to see how the Switch 2's dock might mitigate some of those issues that people certainly have had with the Switch 1 dock over the years. But I have to say, everything I did see, I was very impressed by. I didn't have any issues with any of the design choices or anything. Do I wish they could have gone OLED instead of LCD? Yes, but that LCD is breathtaking, and I really can't praise it enough. I still have a lot of questions about it in the long run, but I think what I saw here today was so deeply impressive that I just can't wait to get my hands on this hardware again. But I do think we can't really fully talk about hardware without talking about its interplay with software. And I don't think there was really any better game that really illustrated the interplay between the software and the hardware than the admittedly kind of funny Switch 2 Tour, which we got to play on the show floor.
Oh, Switch 2 Welcome Tour. There was a reaction in the room to that specific piece of software when we found out it was paid, which I thought was funny. But we did get to play it for a little bit, and you know what? Yeah, it is exactly what it says it is. It is teaching you about the Switch 2 and all the ways that it's cool.
Yeah, it's an unexpectedly technical deep dive into the process behind producing a console like the Switch 2. And I actually, on a certain level, really appreciate that. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I am going to pick up Switch 2 Welcome Tour when it comes out, because I like that kind of stuff. I like the way they get really into the weeds on some of these things. My favorite thing in particular was a demo in which you played level 1-1 of Mario Brothers, and they used it as an illustration of just how big a 4K image is. Because, they explained that each screen in Mario was 256 pixels wide, and that you can get through the entirety of 1-1 without reaching the 4K pixel limit. And to me, that was really kind of funny. Like, they were just like, yeah, the screen draws this narrow ribbon of pixels across a 4K image, and you reach the end of 1-1 and you still haven't fully gotten it yet. So I thought it was really neat to see that. It was a really fun way of kind of visualizing just how much higher the resolution of the Switch 2 is. But there was another demo that used mouse mode that was also particularly interesting.
Is that the one where you're the UFO and you're dodging the spiky balls? That was a surprisingly fun little game. It was a great way to introduce mouse mode. And speaking of mouse mode, the Joy-Con, it just works. It just glides. It feels smooth. The Joy-Con is a little narrow, so holding it can, it'll take some getting used to, but by and large, I thought it felt comfortable. And that game was a great illustration of that because, those spike balls are coming in fast. It's basically like a Toho game where bullets are flying at you everywhere and you have to dodge them all. But you have that precise control, and I never felt like the game was doing something that I didn't want it to.
Yeah, it's remarkable just how tight mouse control feels on the Switch 2. It feels like a very high DPI computer mouse, but tuned just right somehow. It was a very interesting thing to feel that. One of my favorite mouse mode demos within Switch 2 Welcome Tour, that's a mouthful in and of itself, was one in which you have to find the correct strength of vibration. Like, you want to find the strongest one on a line, and you basically move the mouse left and right down this line, and the vibration gets stronger or weaker depending on where you are. And not to brag, but I got the highest score they had seen someone get. I got so you're supposed to get as close as you can, and I think you get a medal for getting within 20 whatevers. I don't know. I don't really know. 20 units of distance from the source of the vibration. And this is not me. I know I'm bragging a bit, but it's not meant to come off as a brag. It's meant to illustrate just how fine-tuned the new HD Rumble 2 is in the Joy-Con, because I was able to feel minute differences in vibrations in this game to the point that I got 3 units of distance away on like my second try. Once I understood what the game was, I was like, oh yeah, this is easy. And to me, it was not very difficult because HD Rumble 2 is very, very, like, it's dramatically better than what's on Switch 1.
HD Rumble 2 feels like what I thought HD Rumble was supposed to be. We were playing, is it Drag and Drive?
I believe it's called Drag and Drive, but it's written like Drag Cross Drive.
Yeah.
The wheelchair basketball game.
Yeah, that game. And when you're actually like moving the Joy-Cons in mouse mode to like spin the wheels, the tactile feeling in the Joy-Con, I mean, it gave me the exact sensation that I would have expected if I literally had my hands on wheels and I was moving them. It was kind of surreal, actually.
Yeah, I had trouble with Drag and Drive, just in terms of I was struggling to fully grasp the controls. I played one round of it because, frankly, despite the fact that we were there a long time, there was a lot to play, a lot of games on the floor, some of which had longer demos. But I really enjoyed what I saw here. The use of HD Rumble in this game, in particular HD Rumble 2 in this game, was so impressive that, yeah, it felt what I would imagine, quickly wheeling a wheelchair would feel like.
And it's not just like it's not just for flavor, right? Like, there is a gameplay element there, because when you're doing that motion and you're feeling that vibration, it's giving you the sensation of how much power you're giving yourself. So like you can tune how fast you're going just based on that feeling you get when you're moving the Joy-Cons.
Yeah, it was really impressive. At no point did I feel like my sense of what I was doing with the Joy-Con and my sense of speed were out of sync with each other. I always felt like I was going the appropriate amount of speed for how quickly I was moving them. One interesting note about this, though, and I thought it was very funny, and I'm sure a lot of people that are making content or writing articles about this today are going to mention this. Drag and Drive actually, in-game, encourages you to use mouse mode on your own legs.
Oh, yeah, on your lap.
Yeah, it tells you to put the Joy-Con in mouse mode on your legs and then wheel them across your legs as a means of playing it. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. It was also the only seated demo, like, in the entire place.
Yeah.
So they really wanted us to do this, and when the game said it, I was like, we're in a controlled environment. I don't think anybody wants us taking the Joy-Con out of sight and then and using them in any ways that are untoward, even if the game is telling us to do it. Because if you've never been to an event like this, there's a set of rules you have to follow, which is why in all the footage you've seen of us playing, either Brandon or I or both of us are in the shot, because that was what we had to do. But during a portion of this, we had a chance to speak to some of the Switch hardware development team, and they also encouraged us to play this game with the Joy-Con in our laps.
They said the majority of their team felt that was the most comfortable way to do it too, which I thought was interesting because, I can kind of see it. Well, one of the issues we had, and the developers addressed this while we were chatting, is that our Joy-Cons were tethered, right? They were tethered to the booth. So, like, we couldn't quite get the level of freedom that you'll have once you have a Switch 2 console at home. So, even if we were brave enough to play using our legs, it probably wouldn't have felt natural because, we were tethered to the booth. One thing about Drag and Drive I want to mention, and this is a really impressive thing to me, and this was also brought up during the developer roundtable, is that it's not just a mouse game, it's a motion-controlled game too. So you're mousing yourself in order to, spin the wheels and move, but when you go to make a basket, you are physically, using your Joy-Con and making the motion to throw a basket. And it goes from mouse mode to that. There's no in-between. It just works, and that's so cool.
It is really cool from a technical perspective to see kind of the seamless transition from mouse mode to using the gyroscope, or using both in tandem, as we saw with some games.
Yeah.
One of the cooler aspects I saw in the trailer, and I tried to make it happen during my time with Drag and Drive, was players using gyroscope to wave, like, hey, I'm open, pass to me. We saw one player give another player a high five in the trailer, which I thought was really cool, just by sticking their hand out. I think those are all really, really cool concepts. I think that there's a lot of potential there with Drag and Drive. I don't know that it's going to find the audience that it maybe deserves, but
there's I hate saying this, but there's no art direction. Everything is just kind of one color, and it feels like tech demo-y because of that, which is not a bad thing. It's just, it feels like it might not have an identity.
It feels like it could use that typical Nintendo whimsy to its design, right?
This might be weird to say, but this is the Switch 2's ARMS. That's how I feel about this game.
I would say that, and I know we're going to talk about Switch 2 editions later on, but ARMS is going to be the Switch 2's ARMS.
Well, I mean, from like the weird, I don't want to say gimmicky gameplay style, because this is actually a very innovative thing. It's, you know, it's also inherently an accessible game, which I think is cool. But just, I don't know, it's just that very like off the beaten path kind of gameplay based video game that Nintendo would come up with that utilizes all of the Switch 2's features, you know, motion controls and mouse control in tandem in a way that's really smart.
Yeah, I think it's really cool to see it. Like you said, just the idea that someone at Nintendo thought wheelchair basketball was cool enough to make like a game out of, I think it's really neat.
Yeah.
I think it's really awesome that they're, I hate to say normalizing, but they are in a way like normalizing wheelchair basketball, you know, because they're not treating it like a punchline or a joke. They're taking it, you know, seriously as just something that's fun to do, and I like that a lot. I think that what I particularly enjoy about the fact that this exists is that I didn't expect anything of this sort from a very successful Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we were able to write off, you know, frankly, like the ARMS of the world, even though, for the record, if you don't know, I love ARMS.
So do I. Yeah.
But, you know, people looked at it and they're like, well, weird Nintendo makes sense. Wii U was a flop. They're trying everything to, you know, they're pulling out all the stops, seeing what sticks. Obviously, Nintendo is very much not in that position now, and they're still making fun, weird experiences that you wouldn't expect from them. So, art direction misgivings aside, because I agree with you, it's just a very colorless type of game. It almost reminds me to a degree of Human Fall Flat.
Yeah.
Just in that you've got these gray avatars, you know. I'd like to see that maybe punched up a bit more, but I don't think we're going to at this point because
Probably not.
We've seen the game. It has a title. This is what it looks like, but I do recommend trying it. I think it's one of those experiences that you need to play to understand. And I could see myself having a lot of fun with this with the right people. And I think that chat is going to be key to that.
Something we did see that I was a little surprised that we saw was GameCube NSO. Not only did we get to play the games, but we got to play using the GameCube controller.
Yeah. The NSO GameCube controller was out and available for us to use, and I gotta say, it felt great. It felt great to have a brand new GameCube controller in my hands after so many years.
An official wireless premium first party Nintendo GameCube controller. So good.
It was good stuff, and I was very happy to see this because I've been wanting something like this for years, and I'm glad that they decided to make a wireless version of the original wired GameCube controller.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's 2025, internal batteries are a thing. We don't need Wavebird level chonk to get wireless anymore. And while I love the Wavebird, I've always liked the original GameCube wired controllers much, much more.
Oh yeah, so have I. But it's not just an original controller. We do have a ZL button in addition to the ZR button. The C button is there. The home button is there. Your capture button is there. Everything you need to have a complete Nintendo Switch experience is basically there. One thing I just instinctively tried to do was click in the two sticks. Can't do that. So
Interesting.
there's no clicky the stick button. But the rest of the GameCube functions are there, and those extra like OS level functions you need are also available on the controller, and that's great.
Yeah, it is fantastic. I also quite like the selection of games that are on NSO.
It's not what you'd expect, is it?
No, I was very surprised to see that we got, Soul Calibur 2 with Link. We got F-Zero GX. We got,
Super Mario Strikers.
Thank you, Super Mario Strikers. And we got the Wind Waker.
Wind Waker HD, baby. It's here.
Yeah, in the most roundabout fashion ever, we got our Wind Waker on Switch. I wonder what this does for Wind Waker HD's eventual,
It's still
long
happening.
rumored release. You think so?
Still happening. I have no doubt in my mind it's still happening.
I wonder. I don't think you can even call it Wind Waker HD anymore, though. I think it has to be
Wind Waker 4K.
Exactly. Wind Waker 4K.
Nintendo Switch 2 edition.
That would be a very funny way of doing it. I noted some performance issues with,
I noticed them too.
GameCube NSO, and I saw them across all 4 games. I'm willing to say that it's likely that the GameCube emulator is just not fully
Finished.
complete. Obviously, games run well enough, but you and I, we didn't play all 4 games because digging into a demo of Wind Waker is tough.
I mean, yeah, it's Wind Waker. Mario Strikers was there, and I would have liked to have played that. But I think the 2 more interesting titles by far were F-Zero GX and Soul Calibur 2.
Yes, and it's worth noting that while I didn't see consistent frame drops, like it wasn't so bad that it was unplayable, they were enough to be noticeable.
Yeah, I only noticed it a couple times in F-Zero GX. When it happened in Soul Calibur 2, I think I just missed it because, I was just focused on beating you up. So like,
to me, it seemed to be centered around when the GameCube would have been streaming data or something. Because I noticed it in loading screens on Soul Calibur mostly, and oddly enough, during actual gameplay in F-Zero. Like, and I think it was more noticeable there because F-Zero is so fast that it's very easy to spot a frame drop.
Yeah, there was a noticeable hitch in F-Zero. I think when I in one of the moments, I think I jumped off a ramp or something, and that's when I saw it. And I said, oh, it stopped. The game stopped for a second. But I am not concerned so much because we've seen over the course of NSO's life that a lot of these games come out, they don't quite work 100% correctly, especially on Nintendo 64, but they've gone back and they've fixed those games. There have been updates. So even if it launches in this particular state, which I think is already pretty good, like not bad, it'll get updates and it'll be better.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that we were playing these on what I believe to be, but I'm not sure, what I believe to be final retail units. I don't think we were playing on any kind of dev kit or any kind of special Switch. So I think what we were playing were unfinished games. And I know from some of the third-party developers who were willing to comment on it, that we were playing builds of games that weren't quite what they have already ready to go, right? Because there's a huge difference between a demo of a game to show people and what your current active development build is. And I would wager that, especially with something like NSO, where you can literally deploy updates whenever you want, and you're 2 months out, that they're still working on, a more compatible version or a more accurate version of their GameCube emulator. But like Brandon said, nothing to really concern me here.
No. One thing I thought was cool, and I think we've seen this in N64, I could be wrong. F-Zero and Soul Calibur 2 on the GameCube had widescreen modes, and they work on Nintendo Switch Online. They widescreen, they fill up the entire screen, the game scales properly. Playing Soul Calibur 2 widescreen felt illegal. I remember we were just on the field in a match, and there was so much space between us, and I was like, this doesn't feel right, but it feels good.
Yeah, it's wild to see them like this, because obviously when the GameCube was out, almost nobody had a widescreen display.
Yeah.
And so seeing these, fully stretched out 16:9, it's so cool, because I also have never experienced these games this way. Soul Calibur 2 was something I put hundreds of hours into and never once saw it in 16:9. So seeing it this way it's quite frankly just amazing. And having these games, like these GameCube classics portably, is a really cool thing.
Soul Calibur 2 especially is an inspired choice. There was a reason they put that one on there.
Oh yeah, and it is the only third-party game on there.
Yeah, it is. And I don't, offhand, I don't recall there being any in that lineup they revealed either.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing a single one. In fact, I think there was a line to the effect that it was like GameCube, original Nintendo classics or something in the Direct. I think they said something
It's
to that
called
effect.
Nintendo Switch Online GameCube Nintendo Classics.
Yes. So that implies that they're really making a pretty big exception here.
Where's Melee? Anyway.
We've made it this long though without talking about the other core component of the Switch 2, and that is its Pro Controller.
Yes.
The Pro Controller that I was very very wrong about in our predictions.
You know, it's we were wrong about it, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole splitting in half thing didn't happen. That doesn't mean there won't be a version of it in the future that can do that, and I think that's a possibility. But what we got here, like, the Pro Controller is a great controller. I love it. Like, the Pro Controller and the DualSense are probably my two favorite modern controllers right now.
Right.
The new Pro Controller, the Pro Controller 2, just, it feels so, like, premium and sturdy. It reminds me of holding a DualSense, which just feels, like, so substantial in your hands.
Yeah, it does have a bit of a heft to it that the original Pro Controller doesn't. It's a very safe controller, in my opinion.
That's true, yeah.
It is marginally improved, and marginally is read wrong by a lot of people these days. But when I say marginally improved, I mean that if you look at the outward design, it's not hugely different. It's not a reinvention of the Pro Controller. It is an evolution of the Pro Controller. Like, I would say Switch 1 to Switch 2 is a drastic redesign.
Yeah.
Whereas Pro Controller 1 to Pro Controller 2, you're like, you could mistake it for a Switch 1 Pro Controller at the wrong angle. Like, if you looked at it dead on and you ignored the giant 2 on the front of it, you'd probably be like, bad, I think it's a Pro Controller, but it's, you know, they've done some things to give it a different feel. It feels a bit more premium, the same way that the Switch 2 does. It's got those same thumbsticks, except instead of blue or red under the thumbsticks, it's got white.
Yeah.
And then on top, it's also white, which is something you actually missed even in the Direct. Like, I had to point it out to you when we were looking at one in the case. I was like, no, look, the top, the buttons are white, but it's something you have to really pay attention to. Mm-hmm. Of course, they've added a headphone jack, which is great. Please, more of that. I would have loved, particularly for the price, to see a speaker and a microphone in the controller.
Yeah, that's a bit of a shock to me, actually, considering that they made such a big deal out of the Switch 2 itself having a mic built in. One that they were having, like, people use from their couch with the Switch in the dock, which, you know, I was, like, having some We Speak nightmare, like, deja vu moments. But, you know, seemingly it works. But, yeah, it would have been nice to have that just right there on the controller. But honestly, like, there's not a whole lot I could have asked for an upgrade. Like, the actual, like, finish on the controller is so comfy.
Yeah, it feels really nice. Really nice in the hand, same way that the Switch 2 Joy-Con do.
Yeah.
Joy-Con 2 and the Pro Controller have a very similar finish to them. They feel like a very satiny type of, you know, it's still plastic, but a very smooth to the touch plastic. Like, it feels comforting to hold, just enough grip to where it doesn't feel slippery.
The Switch Pro controller, you know, it's translucent. You can kind of see through it. There's none of that here, but that controller can get kind of greasy, if you know what I mean. I don't get that vibe from the Pro Controller 2.
Yeah, it felt somewhat oleophobic or resistant to whatever gunk is on one's hands. And I'll be honest, I don't think that's the case. I don't think Nintendo has applied like an oleophobic layer to the Switch Pro Controller, you know, like our phone screens have. But I think that they've done a great job with a dark plastic of masking like fingerprints and gunk and stuff like that. Because, I mean, obviously we're playing on Pro Controllers that have been handled all day by people, and not a single one of them looked unfit for use.
No.
You know? It was just a very impressive controller to me. I think that it's a good evolution of the Switch controller. I'm excited to actually try it, you know, in a non-controlled environment, particularly with game chat, seeing how that all works. But I really love the design of this thing. The two-tone finish it feels like an inverted DualSense in a way.
Yeah, it does. It looks great. One thing I was wondering while we were playing with it, back paddles always make me a little nervous because like buttons like that can be easy to press by accident, and I found that I was doing that on the Switch Joy-Con grip, but obviously it wasn't affecting my gameplay because they weren't assigned to anything, and I think that was true of the Pro Controller as well. Did you find yourself pressing those buttons unintentionally at all?
I found myself fiddling with them intentionally. Like weirdly enough, my fingers would rest there, and then I'd just kind of poke at them because they're fun to push in, but which would doom me if they were mapped to anything. But I didn't really find myself accidentally so much as just not being able to control my impulse to push them.
Sure.
I didn't even know they were on the Joy-Con grip until you told me. I had just not noticed them when I'd used it, and so it was very interesting to find that out. I like that there's at least feature parity between that all of the inputs have the same amount of buttons.
Right. Yeah, I think the Pro Controller is a great evolution of the original one. They don't need to reinvent the wheel. We found out during the developer roundtable that there was a bit of disagreement amongst the Switch 2 developers on whether or not the Pro Controller should have analog triggers, which I thought was interesting. We had one person who clearly wanted analog triggers, yes, and then the other two decided not to. I am admittedly disappointed that there's not analog triggers because the person who brought up the question was like, this is great for racing games. It sure is, but that option's not here.
Yeah, and the excuse that was given was that they wanted higher actuation speed.
Yeah.
Which is, the time from you pushing down to the button actually registering that you've pushed down. But Sony has already solved this on the DualSense Edge. You can set it's called trigger stop, and you can set different levels of it with a physical switch on the back of the controller to customize how far down you have to do your trigger pulls to actuate that button. And so obviously the technology exists. It could have been done. But I also get we're already looking at, and we haven't talked about price, and that's probably a discussion that could go on for hours, but we're already looking at an $80 controller here in the US, and adding more stuff to it is only going to make it more expensive. There's a lot of talk around pricing, particularly with Switch 2, but I have to say I wasn't at all surprised with the console price. And I think the game pricing situation is a bit murky, but this is a hardware preview, so I'm going to stick to the hardware. I don't think I'm surprised by any of the prices for the hardware. I think that $449, after having spent the better part of a day playing with the Switch 2, I can understand how it got to where it is. You're talking about a console with a 7.9-inch, super bright, really good-looking LCD that has 1080p variable refresh rate, or VRR, which smooths out your basically, for lack of a better term, smooths out your frame rate, makes things look more smooth, right?
Yeah.
120 hertz HDR on that display. It is gorgeous. One of the best looking displays I've seen in a handheld, period. It's attached to one of the best performing handhelds I've ever seen. Honestly, frankly, the best performing handheld I've ever seen. Because while I'm not going to go too far into the games, we saw Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom at 60 FPS. We saw Metroid Prime 4
in handheld
at 120 FPS.
Oh my
we
God.
saw Cyberpunk 2077 running like playably. And I should be clear, we didn't see it. These are all things we played. We've played all of these things.
Yeah.
So it's not like a developer just said, yeah, that video is definitely on a Switch 2. No, we grabbed a Switch 2 and played these things. Street Fighter 6 with muscle deformation intact. Lots of stuff that I didn't think was going to be possible even on the Switch 2 was not only possible, but playable.
One game that surprised me that we played, like right at the end of the event, was Split Fiction. It is a split-screen game, and split-screen games usually tank your frame rate. But it just worked, and I was pleasantly surprised by that.
Yeah, we played specifically a level I've already played at home on my PS5, and while you can definitely, as with any Switch game, you can see the visual downgrades where things may have been cut or scaled back. The game was the game, and it ran just as well as the PS5 version, meaning that while it may have not looked the same, it ran just as reliably and solidly as the PS5 version does. And I was very impressed by that.
Nintendo is tapping back into the novelty of playing games in handheld mode with this console, which is something that I thought had just kind of gotten lost with the wave of PC handhelds, that it just didn't feel as novel anymore. But now, based on what I've played today, that feeling's kind of coming back.
Yeah, I have to say that after having played the Switch 2 for a day, I am very optimistic about its fortunes in June. I am more than excited to get my hands on this console eventually and really put it through more rigorous paces. I tried my best to break as many demos as I could. I could not make the Switch 2 break a sweat. I couldn't get it to do something that felt like the developers did not intend for it to do. I went to the highest mountain I could in Tears of the Kingdom and dove as far as I could, as fast as I could. I went to various different locations that are known to tank the frame rate in Breath of the Wild, and I couldn't get a hiccup out of the console. It was just thoroughly impressive. But I think that might be all I can say about the hardware, because while we had a lot of time with it, that time was spent playing games, not really testing the hardware as much as we could.
And we have games to talk about, so we're probably going to cut it here. Stick here to GVG for a whole lot more on Nintendo Switch 2. There's a lot more to come after this.
That's right. We've got new info on Metroid Prime 4. We played Donkey Kong Bonanza. We played everything that you saw in the Direct that is a launch title. So stay tuned.
Save for Bravely Default.
That's true.
That wasn't there for some reason, but a lot of stuff was. So
yeah. So please do us a favor. If you like this video, like, subscribe, do the YouTube thing. Check us out at patreon.com/gvgaming if you'd like to find out how you can get involved, because we couldn't have made this trip without your help. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time. Until then, bye.
See ya.